So my name is Mikaela, and I previously worked as a canoe guide leading kids on long canoe trips. My favorite river to have guided is the Mississauga, which I would love to go back to someday. And since I left university, I now do mostly personal trips and trips with the WCA. Was previously a board member with them, but I'm moving to the States next year, or later this year. So I'm have stepped down from that, but love being involved in the club, and I love talking about food and eating food. So in the midst of the pandemic, I started just putting together all the things I'd learned about meal prep and backcountry cooking into a big PDF, a little digital cookbook. And now I just like talking about food and helping other people make excellent meals on trip. So that's a bit about me. The way I was thinking of structuring today is a little bit on building a meal plan, because I think that's kind of an underrated / overlooked part of the planning process. The food prep, so actually like translating your meal plan into something you can pack, and some hacks to make that easier. And then some tips on actually cooking in the backcountry and over fire. And if at any point throughout this, there's a topic that collectively is everyone kind of understands and doesn't want me to go over, let me know. Or if there's something you have really specific questions about, also let me know. I would like this to be as interactive as possible. Okay, with that spiel out of the way, let's start with meal plans. So before I even think about the food, I like to have my route card pretty much done. And the reason for that is what you eat throughout trip can really complement the trip you're doing in terms of planning like more complex meals for shorter days, easy meals for harder days, and essentially making sure that whatever you're doing, you have the food that best supports the circumstances you're in. Part of that is also planning for meals that involve fresh ingredients to be at the beginning and to try and stretch your fresh ingredients as far as possible. And then the obvious one would be ensuring that you have some easy, like you got to the campsite late, throw everything in a pot, cook up a delicious meal. But no one wants a one pot meal every single day. So it's helpful when you know that you'll have days that are a little bit shorter, that you can make something more elaborate and more fun. I really enjoy the process of cooking in the backcountry. So whenever I can, I like to have more involved recipes that I can kind of involve everyone in. Whereas I know there are some people that food is just fuel and they'll eat whatever. So I see we have a comment. Someone has asked, don't mean to interrupt, but will this presentation be able to read later? The file is going to go on, like the recording will be uploaded onto YouTube, but I won't be sending out these actual slides since they are part of a book that I wrote. But if anyone wants the book, they can let me know. Sorry, I didn't mean for that to come off kind of promotion-y. Anyways, so the other reason for building a meal plan at the beginning is to ensure you have balanced diet and nutrition. So many people end up just eating like pasta and rice throughout the entire trip, which is fine, but there's so much more variety you could be getting and nutrients you won't be getting if you have pasta every day. Another one is to bring snacks and to plan for the days that you're going to have really aggressive days, to bring extra snacks, and maybe on days where you think it might only be like a half day, you probably don't need to. Packing emergency meals, so you'll want to be planning that when you're looking at your route. I typically err on the side of 1 day's worth of emergency food for 5 days I'm out. I'm also a little bit of a paranoid person, though. Some people have told me that that's probably too high of a ratio, but I like to be prepared. So yeah, we can skip to the next slide where I have a sample meal plan. I hope everyone can see it. I realize the font is kind of small, but essentially I like to lay out the distance and the features of each day. Sometimes I'll also try and translate it to time on water. But at this point I can kind of do that math in my head really quickly and get a sense of how long a day will be without including it as a line. But that's when I kind of start throwing in meals that into the days that make the most sense. So for instance, I know that I always like to have a chili with homemade garlic bread recipe. So as soon as I see somewhere that like, oh, this day looks easier, throw that in there. Similarly, if I'll have days where like this day looks really, really long, let's just throw something really easy in. So for instance, like a ramen meal or mac and cheese is always a popular choice. One thing I'll preface this with is before you start doing this, it helps to have like an arsenal of recipes you can possibly draw on, which My CCR is a good resource for that, and like just YouTube. So being able to like make a list of all the meals you want to have and then to kind of fill them in wherever it makes sense. So that's how I do it. Now, to address the question that someone had about assigning people, for so long, all of my canoe tripping was with paper, so I was able to pretty definitively say, like, here's the meal plan. I'm just organize everything myself. A lot of people who do trips with their friends or peers, some people everyone's bringing something, and how do you kind of organize that? And I think someone is not on mute and making noise. So if you're not speaking, please go on mute for a moment. Thanks. So I think there are kind of two ways you can go about doing this. One, and the one that I find the most easiest, is just to have someone who kind of owns the meal plan, similar to how you'd have someone who kind of owns the maps and navigation. Like everyone puts an input, but one person is kind of like leading it. So they might say, like, what meal does everyone want to do? Get a list of like, here's what this person likes to cook. These are the ingredients that this person likes to use. And then to slot them in where it makes sense in the trip, as opposed to having people say like, oh, I'll do Monday's meal, but you don't know what that meal is going to be, and you don't know what you're going to be paddling on Monday. So that's the way that I find to be the most helpful, just having someone who kind of owns it, and then can be kind of like the executor that says, we have too many days that are pasta meals. Can you do something different? Or like, so they kind of like own that. I know other people take a much more casual approach, and they just say like, these are the days you're responsible for food, package it, bring it yourself, and take a very hands-off approach, which I don't like as much. I like having someone who owns it. So I hope that answers your question. One thing that comes up regularly is what happens when you're doing things like that and someone has a lot of dietary restrictions. And I think it depends on how accommodating you want to be. Like if there's one person in the group that has a lot of dietary restrictions, I kind of err on the side of they are responsible for bringing substitutes. Like for instance, I was gluten-free for a long time, so I just always brought my own pasta and would bring my own substitutes. I know some people like to accommodate everyone, so they'll say like, and just remember, we have someone who's vegetarian, so let's make sure there's a vegetarian option for every meal. I kind of think it depends on how accommodating you want to be and the style of the trip. You can definitely take a much more hands-off approach when trips are short, whereas when you've got a really long trip and space and weight and freshness are a little bit more difficult, then you really need someone, I think, in a leadership role that can say like, no, we all need to take a bit of accountability for ourselves. So I don't know, maybe that's a controversial thing to say, but that's how I approach it. Any questions on that before I go on? Someone else has asked a question. Challenge is portion estimation, especially when it comes to homemade dehydrated food. So there's two things I want to talk about here. One is that for those who maybe aren't familiar, dehydrating food is a way to essentially get excellent fresh-ish food throughout your entire trip because it's dried and doesn't go bad. It probably will go bad eventually, but not in like the length of a canoe trip. And some people like to dehydrate full meals. I've never been a fan of that. So I think portion estimation for when you're dehydrating a full meal can be kind of easy because you just, whatever portion you would normally eat, you can just dehydrate and package that as a meal. Like I know if anyone follows Canoe Hound Adventure Show, Dennis has an actual like vacuum sealer. So he'll do like, this is a bowl of chili I would eat right now, dehydrates it, puts it in a vacuum sealer, and knows that like that's one Dennis portion. I don't like dehydrating full meals personally because I really enjoy the process of cooking. So then I just kind of go by the the serving guidance on the box, like, or in the recipe. And I always bias towards having more food than I need, because in canoeing, you're not as limited with space and weight as you would be like on a backpacking trip. But sorry, that isn't like a perfect answer to your question. But I just kind of estimate things according to whatever the portions are going to be, and airing higher if I've got a lot of men on the trip, and skewing lower if I'm guiding 12-year-old girls. So yeah, I think it's something that kind of comes over time with like figuring out what you like to eat and how much you like to eat. I am ravenous on trips, so I always have to treat myself like a portion and a half of whatever the box says. Yeah, the name of the website is Canoe Hound Adventure Show, I think. It's very good. He does interviews every Tuesday. Anyways, we can go to the next slide, which is nutrition. I'll go over this quickly because I feel like people kind of roll their eyes whenever I talk about nutrition because it seems obvious, but I also feel like it's overlooked because everyone just likes to eat cheese and grain products on trip. But it is important to be thinking about when you're looking at your meal plan. Am I getting enough variety? Like mac and cheese really, like it'll fill you up, but it has virtually no nutritional value. So I like to look at my meal plan and ensure that every meal, or at least most meals, have a carbohydrate source for energy, have a protein source, either vegetarian or meat. Most of my protein on trip does come from like vegetarian sources because I don't bring a lot of meat on trip besides like salami, pepperoni, and occasionally dehydrated beef. But that's just not really my style. But some people will bring steak for short trips or dehydrate like other types of meats or have dehydrated beef as like a really big part of their meal plan. So it kind of comes down to preference. Fats are another one that I think often get overlooked because like fats, I'll just throw olive oil and butter into everything, which does work, but you can get fats from a lot of other places too. So thinking about bringing avocado, nuts and seeds, or peanut butter. If you buy an avocado that's not super, like, is very hard in the grocery store, you can make that thing last a week. So I've had avocado quite late into trip, and just don't let it get squished on trip. And finally, the vitamins and minerals and fiber. Fiber is especially important for healthy bowel movements. Sorry, the light's kind of awkward right now. I hope you can see me okay. I should complain about the sun rising in front of my window, but right now it's a little inconvenient. And ultimately, the vitamins and minerals, I just dehydrate every kind of vegetable I can and throw it into everything. Like mac and cheese with dehydrated mushrooms, yes. And that's how I get those kinds of nutrients. So on the next slide, I have kind of a breakdown of what I think about with a meal. I don't do this for every meal. That would be a lot of effort, and it is usually pretty obvious. But just something to think about, like if you're looking at your meal plan and wondering, like, what do I have that's got a protein or fat in it? This can be a helpful way of thinking about it. So I think that kind of wraps up the meal, like the menu planning portion of this, unless anyone has any questions. I think the biggest thing to just, my biggest piece of advice is to really plan it around the route you're taking, just to ensure that, like, if you don't want to get to the campsite and realize the only meal you have is one that's going to take a really long time and it's 5 p.m. and you're going to be doing dishes in the dark. Whatever you can do to avoid that fate is a good idea. And on that same note, you're not married to your meal plan. You can always change it. Like if one day turns out to be much harder than another, like you don't have to stick to it. So yeah, if there are no more questions, we move to the next section, which is on packing and prepping.
Can I just ask you a question, Mikaela?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is for the last session or the next one, but what is the sort of cooking infrastructure that is critical in your mind?
Oh, I have a, we can talk about that now. I think it's on slide 9. I have a list of equipment. I'm assuming that's what you mean, kind of like all.
Yeah, okay, we'll leave it till then.
Okay, so we can go next slide then. So I'll make kind of a sample packing list at the beginning. I'm more of this just as an illustrative piece for this, since I think, judging by you guys and just seeing your faces before on different WCA webinars. I'm pretty sure most of you canoe somewhat regularly, or very, very regularly. So you probably already know the kind of things that you bring on trip. But if anyone here is totally new, these are just kind of like the staples that I always have. And then it's continued onto the next slide too. And sometimes if I'm kind of feeling a little like, not really feeling any of my usual recipes, I'll just kind of come back to my list of staple ingredients and go like, what can I do with beans and hummus? And then look for on YouTube, like camping recipes with hummus to get a little bit of inspiration. And the next slide is a continuation of more things that I bring. So yeah, we
can I just ask about dehydrated hummus?
Yeah.
Do you make the hummus and then you turn around and dehydrate it, or?
Yeah, I've never tried it with store-bought hummus. I usually just make my own and then spread it onto parchment paper and put it in the oven. So it comes out very crumbly, and you kind of just have to like force it into a bag. But then once you add some water and give it a stir, it's very good. So yeah. If anyone has other questions on dehydrating, I have done all of my dehydrating in an oven and have attempted to dehydrate everything except for like dairy, pretty much, and chicken and like most meats. So I have a lot of fun with it if anyone has questions. Wouldn't the fat in hummus cause a problem? People keep saying this to me, and I've never, and I get it because it should, but I've never found it to be an issue. I don't know if maybe like when I make hummus homemade, it's very solid, not the kind like when you get it in a store-bought container, how it's got like kind of that ring of oil around it. So I think I might just not have very oily or fatty hummus because it's always been fine for me. So I would say if you're having issues with it dehydrating funny with all the fat, maybe try making your own. So yeah.
I just assume that the fat from the tahini I'm assuming you're using tahini in your hummus.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never had it.
That's basically like a nut butter, right?
Yeah. Maybe I don't put in enough for it to be an issue.
Okay. And maybe just how long, maybe it's just a matter of duration, right? Like fat can be dehydrated food. It's just maybe potentially it's not, you haven't been at room temperature for an extended period of time to which it would actually go rancid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's interesting.
Thanks.
I know it takes a long time to dehydrate. I also do it in an oven though, so I have like such a skewed perception on how long things take to dehydrate. Yeah. Any other questions about just kind of like ingredients to bring? Or yeah, okay. Another thing I don't have on here is that I haven't gone into it too much myself, but there's a lot of packaged ingredients that people like to bring, like instant noodles or ramen packages or Bisquick. I never really got into that myself, mostly because most of my canoe tripping came from guiding kids, and camps have very, very low budgets. So we use like the most basic ingredients that were available all the time. But I have seen some MyCCR recipes that get pretty creative with using Bisquick for stuff and a lot of like other kind of more ready-made ingredients. Anyways, we can move on to the next section, which is about actually prepping the food. And there's two parts that I want to talk about here. One is what you actually put the food in, and the other is organizing the food based on either pantry style or packaging food by the meal. And I'll get into that in a moment. But to start things off, I use a lot of plastic bags when I am prepping food. So if anyone has any recommendations for things that aren't plastic bags, I welcome it. I've tried using beeswax recently, and that works for like 2-day trips, or the silicone ones, but they're so bulky that it just doesn't make sense for a long trip. So if anyone has any tips on that, I would love to hear it. But for now, I buy lots of those plastic bags from Bulk Barn that have the open top. I guess you technically could use Ziploc, but I find they end up being a lot more bulky, and I don't like having to I just don't trust them as much as I trust like a knotted bag. For grains, I highly recommend double bagging them, because a little puncture in the oats and suddenly your barrel is oatmeal soup. For fruits and vegetables, I'll package all of the individuals in small bags. So like, this is my zucchini bag and this is my sweet potato bag. And then I'll just throw all those into a big bag so that I can find them easily. For all other powders, they just go into small bags. You can buy like, I think it's like 5 liters. Like, they're really small and they're great for building up a spice kit, or things like baking soda where you really just need a small amount. For liquids, for anything small, I use travel shampoo bottles, or if anyone subscribes to like a meal subscription kit, I did Good Foods for a month and they send so much packaging. I stopped using it, but they sent me so many of these little food containers. They're like this big, because that's how they give you the oil and vinegar. So if you're subscribed to any of those, keep the containers because they're really helpful. For bigger ones, Nalgene is a good brand. Like, you can put them in the water bottle, or they have some like open top plastic containers that are just like a screw-on lid. My tip is to still put them in a plastic bag though, which I know is controversial. Some people say that that's unnecessary and just makes it messier inside. But for things like oil or like maple syrup, I prefer to put them in a bag, slip knot it, put it into a Nalgene, because then if you are like me and drop your Nalgene on the granite rocks, the Canadian Shield, and lid kind of breaks a little bit, you're still okay. Or if you like make a mistake and don't do it up all the way, it's not going to leak all over the other food in your barrel. So that's kind of a tip from me. And another one is to label everything with a Sharpie, because especially when you're a few days into trip, you're like, this is a white grain, this is a white powder, which one is sugar and which one is baking soda, or which one is flour and which one is cornmeal. Actually, that one would probably be more obvious to tell the difference, but label everything. Otherwise, you might have some creative meals. I once messed up the sugar and the salt, which in hindsight was very silly, but it gave us terrible, terrible bread. Okay, so for our next slide, this is where we get into how do you organize the food, because some people are advocates for the pantry style, which is like you have one bag that contains all of your oats, or one bag that contains all of your flour. Whereas some people are more on the by the meal side of things, where they actually budget out like, this is the oats that we need for one meal, and these are the oats we need for meal number 2. And I err on the side of the meal because I have a hard time budgeting and portioning food when it's all in the same bag. The pro with pantry style is you end up with a lot fewer bags, and because you don't have so many bags, it can pack a little bit nicer in your barrel. But I still do everything by the meal. So I'll have like a really big bag, because those open top bags, you can get like a 25 liter one. They go really big in size. I wouldn't probably ever do one that big, but you could. And it'll be like, here's the oats, here's the pasta noodles. Here are the vegetables that I'm going to put in here. Here is the portion of salami that will go into it. And then that all gets bagged. And it's like, this is dinner on day 6. On really long trips, I'll do that, but package 3 meals in one, just to make things a little bit more reasonable with the number of bags I'm using. So I might have like, this is mac and cheese. This is the mac and cheese kit for 3 days, or 3 days worth of mac and cheese. The only exceptions to that are things like oil, or things that are kind of like used a little bit everywhere, or like the spice kit. I just have those as their own thing. And another one is cheese. Don't portion out your cheese, because you can make cheese last a really long time. I had cheese the entire length of the Missinaba, just 22 days. And using a good vinegar wrap, and in the last few days, we were cutting off a little bit of mold, but for the most part, it was mold free, because you have a big block, minimum surface area. So most of the cheese is not coming in contact with air. You wrap it in a vinegar wrap and it'll keep for a long time. But cheese is another exception to that. I wouldn't divide cheese by the day.
Sam's this big salami.
Pardon me?
The same as the salami.
Yeah, so, or sorry, what's the question? Like, do I portion out salami?
Oh, no, I thought I was mute.
Oh,
But I was saying, you were talking about the cheese, and I was saying it's the same with a big salami.
yeah,
You
especially
leave
when they come in that big tube.
Yeah, big German
Yeah,
salami, it would be the same philosophy there.
yeah,
I'll go on mute.
no worries. Someone asked
Can
if
you-
I could describe a vinegar wrap.
Yeah.
So, if you go to the grocery store, they'll have these blue J cloths. That's what I've always used. I'm sure you could use another kind of cloth too. And it gets soaked in white vinegar. And then you buy cheese in the like largest minimum surface area possible. So like just a big block of cheese. And then you wrap it in vinegar wrap, in the vinegar wrap, and then put that into a plastic bag. And that should stay mold free for a long time, especially if you don't open the bag. So, oh yeah, cheesecloth works well for vinegar wrap. That makes sense. So for instance, what we did on the Mississinapi is we had 3 humongous blocks of cheese. Like they must have been this big. And 2 of them, it was like week 1, week 2, week 3, plus a few days. And the 2 that were later in the trip, we just didn't ever open the bag. And so we're on day 15 and I open up a new bag of cheese. And I mean, you get a little bit of a vinegar tinge to it if you were to eat the cheese plain. But it doesn't come through in like recipes or anything. And it was totally mold free. It was as close to new cheese as you could expect to get on day 15 of a trip. So yeah, that's kind of a helpful bit to know. Let's go on to equipment, because I know there was a question about that. So this is kind of what goes into my cooking kit. So some of them are pretty obvious, like matches and lighters, need a fire and a stove, or a stove. Otherwise, we're not going to get very far. A knife and a cutting board. Oh, one thing that I've been seeing a lot of chit chat about on the Facebook group that I just want to throw my 2 cents into is, should you use your barrel lid as a cutting board? And my opinion on this is no, especially the outside, because I'll see people like set up their barrel and then cut right on top of it. I'm like, well, now your barrel lid smells like salami. So that doesn't work for me. And the other one is like, I don't want my sharp knife touching my barrel lid. I've seen a lot of barrel lids that have like slices in them where someone's clearly done that. So
Hi,
I just bring a regular cutting board.
Hi, Wrigley.
One
Hi,
of the
Pop.
pans. Oh, sorry. What was that? Oh, thought someone had something to say. Pots and pans, that's pretty obvious. And then also bring like a spatula and a big spoon for stirring and serving. Grill, especially if you're going to be cooking over a fire. Some campsites, especially those in like Algonquin and Killarney, will have grills at the site, but don't bank on it. Next one would be a stove, fuel, and fuel canister. Even if you don't like cooking over a stove, I personally don't. Still bring one just in case it's been pouring rain for 3 days and you can't make a fire. Okay, ovens, the exciting part. There are 2 types of ovens that I like to use. One is a Dutch oven and the other is a reflector oven, and they unlock a whole new array of great recipes. Basically anything you can bake in an oven, you can bake in a Dutch oven. I'm sure there's actually a few things you can't do in a Dutch oven, but for now I'm gonna say most things that you can cook in an oven, you can do in a Dutch oven. It's basically, if you're not familiar, a cast iron or aluminum, what the picture looks like, pot that sits on the coals, and you can put coals on top, so you get like a 360-degree heating experience. The cast iron ones work really well because they heat so slowly and distribute heat inside the oven really well. Aluminum is a lot lighter, but you will get a little bit of, like if you do bread, you'll expect like a small bit of burning on the outside in the time it takes for the inside to cook, I've found. But either way, things like egg frittata, bread, garlic bread, cinnamon buns, some of them are a deeper dish and you can do like stews in them, though I don't do that myself. And a reflector oven is similar in the sense that it allows you to kind of replicate the oven environment with a fire, but it essentially sits on the side of the fire, and the heat goes in to this cool designed, well, you can see in the picture what it looks like. And it creates kind of like an oven. So you still need like a baking tray or a like little cake pan, but you can make something in that, put it there, and then halfway through you just rotate it and you can make a full cake. Or I like to do brownies in there. Other items I like, depending on how tight I am for space, is an AeroPress coffee maker. I've tried a lot of different methods for making coffee, and that's my favorite one now. Salad mixer can be nice for, I only bring that if it's a short trip because it's such a specific thing for only a couple uses. But for making dressing and powdered milk, it's helpful, especially being able to like shake and pour. And on hikes, this talk is geared at canoeing, but if you're wondering, on hikes, I like to bring a bear canister. At the end, I don't know if I included a slide on it in this, but we'll talk a little bit about keeping food safe from bears, because I'd also be interested to hear what everyone else thinks, because there's this like to hang or not to hang debate going on. So let's continue on. I can't even remember what slide I have next. Oh yeah, cleanup. I think at the end we'll do some talk on actual recipes, but I really wanted to make sure I had time to go over things for dishes, because I find so many people aren't doing their dishes in a leave no trace way, and I'm trying to get everyone to change. So if you already do it like this, thank you. If not, maybe you'll learn something new. So once you're done the actual cooking of your meal, which the actual cooking of it is kind of hard for me to teach over a webinar. I think it's something where you just have to get out and do it. And the more you're practicing cooking, the better you'll get. But once that's all said and done, you've got a bunch of food or dishes that have touched food. What do? I have I guess this is a 5-step process to wash dishes. So essentially having either pots or dish bins that will allow me to have a wash bucket and a rinse bucket. If we have a third pot or dish bin, there might be like a pre-rinse. Fill them with warm, and then fill them with warm water. The warm water isn't necessary, but I think it's so much nicer in the evening to like just put on a pot of warm water over the fire and then wash them in that. It's nicer for the hands. And a tiny bit of biodegradable soap, just a little bit. Before putting the dishes into the water, I'll scrape off as much as possible into the garbage bag. If it's a really small amount, I might try burning it. But I find most people don't, especially in the mornings, don't burn their food enough to correctly burn food as a way of getting rid of food waste. So if you're unsure or you have a lot of food, just put it in a garbage bag. Then wash them in the wash, then rinse them, and then I like to flip them on top of an overturned canoe or on the rocks to let them dry. Don't package them up right away, because either when they're wet and then they get stacked, they get sticky. They just start to smell like mildew. And I don't know if that's actually mold growing on the dishes themselves. It probably isn't, but it gives them a weird smell. So I avoid that by just letting everything air dry. With your dirty dishwater, take a walk into the woods. I think the guidance is 200 feet from any water source, and dig a cat hole. So just like a little hole, pour it in there, bury it. Be careful when you're pouring the water into the hole that you don't let any food scraps that you missed get in there. Those can just go into your garbage bag. And then once that's all said and done, you've got clean dishes and the environment is super happy. So I just said a lot of things, but only use a small amount of soap. Avoid any food getting anywhere other than your garbage bag, and bury your dishwater. Some people will just kind of pour it over a large stretch of water, or over a large stretch of land. But Leave No Trace has said that they don't like that. So instead, bury it. I realize I went over that very quickly. So if anyone has questions, let me know. But most people don't like to talk about dishes, so I'll move it on. The other kind of, so we can skip to the next slide. I think it might be 2. Oh yeah, here's just the finishing of me talking about dishes. We can go on to food and animals because I think that is very important. Someone has asked, what do you do with used coffee grounds? I pack them out. I just put them in my garbage bag and pack them out with me. Some people burn theirs, but I've just never been in the habit of doing that. Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, that's fine. So the last thing I want to talk about before I kind of get into meal ideas and stuff is avoiding contact with animals. You're far more likely to be bothered by like raccoons and squirrels and chipmunks than you are with bears, although everyone likes to talk about bears. And my view is keep your number one is just to keep your campsite as food free as possible, like no food in the tents. If you spill something, you pick it up. Don't leave food that hasn't been burned all the way in the fire. And basically just minimize the chance that your campsite smells like food. If you're camping somewhere really popular like Algonquin, that's going to be difficult because the people before you didn't necessarily do that, and the animals have probably already realized like this is a place where people camp and like to drop pasta noodles. But if you're somewhere more remote, you can pretty much you can feel pretty confident that your area is not yet associated with food. So by correctly disposing of your garbage and your dishwater, and by keeping the area around your campsite as food free as possible, it's less likely that you're going to be bothered by animals at all. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still do something about bears. So my general guidance is if you're in an area that gets a lot of human activity, like Canoe Lake Algonquin, you probably do want to do a bear hang. I don't personally like hanging barrels, so I never do, and that's a personal decision. I instead walk my barrel out a good distance from the tents and clip it to a tree, like using the barrel harness, which technically, I guess, is not the recommended thing, but on a short trip like that, worst case scenario, the bear gets into my food and then I just have to end my trip shorter. Just because I don't feel comfortable hanging a barrel because I'm not confident enough in my knots to not have that come crashing down on someone. But that's a personal choice. In an area that doesn't get a lot of human activity, I still do the same method, or sometimes I don't. I just walk them far away and I don't necessarily clip them, but that has over the years become my kind of go-to. It's just clipping them to a tree because I feel okay that the bear could. I would be impressed if the bear could get the harness straps unbuckled. If I am doing a bear hang, do it kind of follow the general guidelines and away from the campsite. But I'd be interested in if anyone else has opinions on kind of to hang versus to not hang versus what to do, just because those are the methods I found to be helpful over the years. I've also tried things like a bear float where you put your barrel in a canoe and like push it out into the water tied with a rope. But the only thing worse than losing a barrel is losing a barrel and a canoe. So I don't do that. But yeah, so if anyone wants to throw in their 2 cents.
I would say just hang if you can, but as you noted in the past, there's just certain cases where you just can't find the perfect tree in a lot of cases. So be diligent, keep it far away from your campsite, and out of sight, kind of out of way, out of earshot, so that it'd be done. I know a lot of people actually practice the opposite in the longer distances. They don't want their food to be taken, so they have it close by. So if something wrangles around with it, they'll actually be woken up. Likely it'll happen at night.
Yeah, actually on the Missinaba, there was a point where we would put the food near, like the kids slept over here. I slept in my tent with the co-guide over here, and we kept the food near us with paddles stacked or kind of like leaning on top of them. So at least if an animal came over and tried to touch the food, the paddles would fall down, which would either scare them off or alert me that, ooh, something's touching our food. So that's a good point. Sometimes it's helpful to keep it close. There's also a guy who's a very accomplished backpacker who backpacks everywhere, and he sleeps with his food, which I think is an interesting take. But anyways, I'm getting us sidetracked. So
we've done the same as what you're recommending, and we've never had a problem with that. taking the barrel a little bit away and tying it to a tree.
Yeah. And also all the stories I've heard from people who have had their barrel messed around with a bear, it's always been that the bear is like dragging their barrel away, not that the bear is actually like getting it open. Like I know in some circumstances people have had their barrels like broken and torn open by a bear, but in most cases it's just that the bear is, they see their barrel being dragged off by a bear. But if it's attached to a tree, I hope it won't be able to do that. So that kind of concludes the, I guess, all the theory, if you want to call it that, of what I think about with backcountry cooking and meal prep. And I wanted to leave the last bit for either like random off the cuff tips for meal planning on canoe trips, or if anyone has questions or ideas about things. So
Now's the time.
pardon me. So if anyone has questions, either speak up or you can put a question in the comments thing. Otherwise, I can just kind of talk about some resources for finding recipes and just kind of like random tidbits of helpful information I've found over the years. So one would be, if anyone, I don't know why I only recently discovered this a few canoe trips ago, but if you don't do it yet, bringing your canoe up to where the camp, like where your kitchen area is, and then flipping it over. You can put like 2 big logs down and the canoe over top. You've got a table. Just don't put a hot pot directly on the canoe, because then you'll get a little indentation where the pot was, especially if it's one of the plastic canoes. Another kind of random tidbit of information would be the places to find recipes. If anyone's not familiar with it, on My CCR, they have a whole recipe index, and there's got to be like 100 random recipes. That is a place where I now more recently have taken a lot of inspiration in. Yeah, that's a good resource. I think also YouTube, of course. I know everyone here is into YouTube videos in the WCA, so there's a lot of resources there for where people actually demonstrate making food. I would highly recommend learning how to make bread in a Dutch oven on trip, because that is a huge game changer, especially on long trips when you can't make wraps last a long amount of time. Actually, this is kind of an aside, but one thing I want to, I'll maybe add as my additional tip is lunches can be really difficult when you are on a longer canoe trip, because like bread doesn't last, people get tired of wraps after a while, and you can't, unless you have kind of a shorter day, you might not necessarily want to be cooking something in the middle of the day. So anywhere that, if you're cooking pasta one night, I recommend doing a full extra serving and then making like a pasta salad that you can put into a plastic container or a plastic bag to have the next day, because that's a nice break from having just the same wraps every day. Same goes with like quinoa. If I was already cooking it, or if I'm cooking something that doesn't use the pot, I'll just put on a pot of quinoa, chop up some veggies, and make it like have some olive oil and vinegar and spices on hand to throw into there, which is like a little bit of a messier lunch because you have bowls involved, but then I'll just put all the bowls into the barrel and wash them when we get to the campsite. One point, I didn't mention this before, but the garbage that potentially has food in it, if you're going to be hanging or dealing with your barrels, include that there too. Some people keep it in their equipment pack, but it smells like food, so don't do that. Anyways, another example of a lunch that's not wraps would be like, I think they're called Buddha bowls, but it's basically just like random ingredients with hummus. So you could do like dehydrated veggie chips. I like that, with some like flax crackers and some dried fruit on the side and like in a bowl. And that's just kind of a way to get a little bit more creative. Or if you do have the time and you're in a small group, just like throwing up a stove, cooking some quick wraps is always like a way to make wraps so much better. Like melted cheese makes all wraps better. So those would be my like random lunch tips. I see some chatter going on in the chat just about Eurosac. I actually tried one and I was quite impressed. It's like feels very durable, though it's still to just have it in a bag makes me nervous to think about, but supposedly it's fine. Yeah. So
I have an Ursac. I use it for solo trips mainly because they only get so big.
Yeah.
I multiple very expensive bags. It's kind of handy for solo trips. Gives me a better peace of mind than just a normal dry bag hanging off somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I purchased the extra large of it, and it still is limited, but you could always have a couple of them for backpacking trip stuff like that. It's ideal. Haven't had anything go in it yet, so.
Yeah. Someone has asked, I often bring cooked and dehydrated grains, veggies, meats, and place in a Nalgene or thermos in the morning, pour the correct amount of water, and it sits ready for lunch. I like that idea. Kind of like a slow cooked lunch. Into that. So yeah, my biggest advice with all backcountry cooking comes down to just like practice. Even if like I've been trying to get better at using my reflector oven. So I just have like a little fire pit in my backyard. One of the ones that you like sit in between some chairs, and have been making fires in that and cooking with the reflector oven just to kind of get better at it. So especially right now when in Ontario can't exactly cook, like just going out there with either a fire pit or your stove and just experimenting with things. Even in the cookbook I wrote, I never put like specific amounts of ingredients. Like this recipe calls for 1/2 cup of such and such a thing, unless it's bread. Bread is the exception to that. Because I think of it as being more art than science, and you kind of just figure things out as you go along. So especially if you want to practice like dehydrating and then rehydrating over a stove, like that's a good kind of hobby to take up when you can't leave your backyard. Yeah, so I don't know. And over time things get a lot better, and it becomes kind of an intuition thing. I always figure I'm actually a very bad cook, and just bad in general at like feeding myself in the real world. I don't know why on trip I suddenly have this like passion to make good food. But I figure if you can do it in your house, you can do it on trip some way. So yeah. I don't know if anyone else has anything. Have you ever experimented with cold soaked meals? I have not. I don't even know what a cold soaked meal is. If anyone wants to chime in, but I don't know what that is. Oh, so yeah, okay. Okay, still don't know what cold soaked meals are. But yeah, okay, so that kind of wraps up everything I had to talk about. If no one has questions or things they want to talk about specifically, feel free to drop off. Or if you're like, finally communicating with a group of people that aren't in my direct household and you just want to chat about canoeing.
Can I just ask about a Dutch oven?
Yeah.
I've got a 7-liter cast iron one. I think it weighs 19 pounds. Would you, I mean, is that the type of thing you would take? And are there, if it's a portage heavy trip, would you sort of leave that one behind, or is it worth it in your mind for any trip, no matter the circumstances?
So if it's 19 pounds, I would never bring it.
Okay.
That's very.
So they make lighter ones or smaller.
Yeah.
That's 7 liters.
Yeah. So I have, I used to use one from GSI. That's an aluminum one, and it's not as good as the cast iron. As I said, I think before, the edges of things always are like a little too crispy, but it gets the job done. And I think it weighs 5 pounds. It might even weigh less than that, actually. It's very, very light. I've also used a pretty small, I think it was only like 4 quarts of a cast iron one, which is pretty small. And it was pretty light, but that was for a river trip where we only really had one big portage. I think if I was going to bring a Dutch oven like on a flat water canoe trip that had a lot of portaging, I would only go aluminum. The cast iron ones are just so heavy. Yeah.
Good for car camping, maybe.
Yeah, and I find that so many of the Dutch oven recipes online are designed for people who car camp. So like, look at all of these ingredients, and like all the images are them with like on a picnic table, and they've got, I don't know. Definitely feels like it's targeted at the car campers. But the
Well,
aluminum one is, I was quite impressed with it. I was able to make bread and everything.
It's very suitable for a river like the Nahanni, which has one portage. You just have to go around Virginia Falls and you're out for 3 weeks. So an outfit like Black Feather is cooking every night in a Dutch oven.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a whole Dutch oven cookbook.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Well, they did. It's a long time ago, but they.
Oh, I'll check that out. I find that there's still so much more I could be doing in a Dutch oven. Because I mostly do the like cinnamon buns and bread and like a couple egg things. But I feel like you could get really creative with different things in a Dutch oven, and I'm not even like scratching the surface yet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, another thing that I bring up is a lot of things that are like, I've recently discovered that Amazon has so many different types of dehydrated and dried ingredients. And then there are also like local Canada places that make substitutes as well, like dried eggs that are, because dehydrating your own eggs, I don't think you can really do. I've never tried it. But I always hear bad stories when people try it. But like getting powdered eggs or dehydrated eggs. And someone just brought up dehydrated chicken, which I'd never heard of, but that would be a cool thing to try out. So
I actually had great success with dehydrating eggs last summer.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, in the Excalibur dehydrator.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Worked really well.
Would you cook the eggs before you dehydrate? Or are you talking raw eggs?
No, they were raw, and then we made them into scrambled eggs.
It worked really well. They were great.
Cool. I should try that out. I feel like I really just need to get a dehydrator because I try and do everything in my oven, which is mostly fine. But I think a few things just like need a proper venting system that I can't get with my oven. But yeah, I should try that out. Anyone else have fun tips? I feel like I've called the talk.
Worry about food security by having all the food in one canoe or 2 canoes instead of spreading it out?
On the trips I've guided, we've always had 3 barrels of food, kind of like a breakfast / dessert, a lunch, and a dinner, just because there were so many people, and those would all go into like a different boat. I never really think about that as being an issue though, but I'm thinking like if you were on if I was on a river that was like a continuous river with like lots of like continuous swifts or like continuous current like up north, I probably would think about spreading out the food in between things, just because if you lose a barrel, it's just going to keep going. But I've never worried about actually just losing a barrel on the southern river trips or on my portage trips. Yeah, I never really thought about that. But it makes sense why you would want to not have all your eggs in one basket or eggs in one barrel.
Another good resource online I find is Kevin Outdoors. I think you did an interview with him.
Oh, yeah.
Kevin Outdoors, he's got some really good practical videos regarding dehydrating if you're just getting into it. It's yeah, and good recipes as well. I think he's actually he's due to come out with a cookbook himself this year, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited to get that myself. Cool. Anyone have anything else they want to ask or chime in?
Mikaela, maybe I could just jump in for a second here if I could. First off, thank you very, very much for this presentation. It's absolutely excellent, and it's stimulated a lot of thought here. This is obviously something you've put together professionally. Do you have this in a book format, and is it available?
Yes and no. So it exists as a digital book, which I can send out a link to. It also does exist as a physical book, which I actually have right here, which I was using for my notes. But I've done the last print run of it already for the year. So I have, at this point, 9 copies left. So once they're gone, I'm not going to do another print run. just because it's too much for me to do right now with starting a new job.
So those 9 copies, do they go up on eBay and bid on them? Is that how that works?
Oh my gosh, I would love it if there was enough demand in it to start like a bidding war over my cookbook. No, but I can send you a link if you want.
That'd be great.
You sell them on my website. But
the second thing is I noticed that you didn't make any comments about any consumption of alcohol on trips. Now, there's a lot of abstainers that do exist out there, I'm sure. We do enjoy something throughout the trip, a little bit of scotch or whatever else may exist. Lisa's made some impressive cocktails along the way with some things and so forth. I do enjoy wine, which is very difficult to take on a wilderness trip because it weighs a lot. I did try dehydrating it, didn't work out very well.
Yeah.
So that's just joking. But so I don't know if you have ever worked with taking things along a trip like that and so forth.
Probably
But
not on trips with 12-year-olds.
no, not with 12-year-olds, I guess.
the first 6 years of all my canoe tripping,
Especially with 12-year-olds. Come on.
that's a way to get fired. But actually, for the once I graduated university and started doing trips with other adults, I went a 2.5-year period where I didn't drink at all. So I never really got into it. And only have recently started carrying alcohol on trip. And I think actually in one of the YouTube videos I put up of one of the WCA trips, you can see that on top of the dry sack, there's just throughout all the rapids, not secure or anything, there's just a box of wine. Because it had gone wet and was just a soggy bag of wine sits there throughout all the rapids, which is kind of funny. But with short trips, we bring boxed wine. And for the longer ones, a nice whiskey or a nice flask of, some people like whiskey. I prefer other things. I love Bailey's as like, and there's someone who I canoe trip regularly with now who has the Bailey's cream that he's like, let's give your coffee a kick in the morning. So I now think I'm having like half a shot of alcohol before I even start canoeing for the day. So that's probably questionable, but it's kind of a fun way to make coffee, which over a stove or over a fire can sometimes taste a little blah, to make it taste good. So that's what I'll add to that part of the conversation.
Thank you. Find a nice scotch is nice as hand in the little what do you call those little platypus bags it's quite easy. I brought along before wine in little Tetra packs, little like 1 liter cartons. You can see them at liquor stores as well. Or at least in where I'm at, you see them once in a while in liquor stores, and they're quite good. But as you noted, like they're quite heavy over it, depending on how long and how much you plan on consuming. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Apparently, there's a company that's in the process of coming out with a powdered alcohol. I think they like secured the patent for it and are now like ramping up production. But they said that it takes their process removes the alcohol. So you could have like, you have a wine flavored beverage or like rehydrated wine, but without the alcohol content. So
that sort of defeats the whole purpose of it.
Well, I was like, I guess if you really just love the taste of red wine and want something kind of similar, but
isn't that just grape juice crystals?
That's what I said, but I don't know.
I don't see how you could ever get to dehydrate any kind. Like if alcohol evaporates at a lower temperature than water, then you're SOL when it comes to actually getting any kind of alcohol in a non-liquid form.
Yeah.
Maybe Jello shots, but I think that's as close to solid as you're going to get. And good luck with maintaining that.
Yeah. Fun. Yeah. If there's anything anyone else wants to add in, otherwise I can let you guys go and get back to your Saturdays. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. That was absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thanks. I've done it once before and was like much more focused on the recipe side of things. But I feel like that, like people can, I think, figure out the recipes. I think it's kind of all the things that go around it that are like things might just not have thought of. So I hope that this went well. I wish someone had watched both the presentations and could give me like feedback on the content on both of them, whichever like resonates more with people. But if you guys are saying you liked it, then that makes me happy. So yeah.
Wonderful.
And I'll send out a link with the cookbook, but obviously no pressure to get it. Trying not to be promo-y. Anyways, thanks again for joining. This will be up on YouTube, I believe, with the WCA channel, and emailed around if you ever want to look back or if you joined late. So yeah, thanks so much for attending.
Yeah, excellent presentation.
Thanks.
Well done, Mikaela.
Thank you.